RMT union members employed by Network Rail are to hold 24-hour Britain-wide strikes tomorrow, Thursday and Saturday. The action will cause major disruption across Scotland. On those days, only 5 ScotRail services will operate, all within the Central Belt. And passengers are being warned of a whole week of travel misery, with reduced services in the days between and following the strikes. The dispute, which is over pay, working conditions and redundancies, has come with a war of words over who's to blame. We discussed it and the wider prospect of a summer of discontent with the Deputy Director of the STUC, Dave Moxham, and the former Scotsman editor, John McLellan, who used to be an advisor to the Scottish Conservatives. Dave Moxham, are you fully supporting the RMT strike?
100%. We've got cleaners, we've got maintenance workers, we've got people who are really important during the pandemic, looking down the barrel of a significant impact on their own standard of living. So we fully support them in financial terms, but also because this strike is much more about the safety of the railway. It's about what the railway looks like in the future. So for many, many reasons, we're fully backing the workers tomorrow.
John, would it be your view that the RMT are within their rights to be striking now, or perhaps more specifically, should be striking now?
Well, I think every worker, bar the police and the army obviously, has the right to withdraw their labour. I don't think that all avenues have been explored, and I think that the RMT, as always, are quick to press the strike button. And it's unfortunate that thousands of other fellow workers are going to be adversely affected by the action this week.
And what about the broader point Dave's making? It's not just about pay, it's about the future of the railways.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's a fair point, that the future of the railways is very much in flux. The problem, I think, from the RMT's point of view is that by going on strike, as they do repeatedly, then their part of the future of the railways is the one thing that's going to be in doubt, because the railways will change. The technological advances will come, and it will affect the numbers of people employed by the railways and affect the roles that they carry out. By repeatedly bringing the railways to a halt, it accelerates that process. As we saw in the 70s and 80s with the print unions, they tried to hold back advances and found themselves out of a job. Is that a concern for you, Dave?
I mean, everything's a concern because we were in a very, very difficult situation. But, you know, the RMT have been in discussions for months about this, months and months. Only this week they were imploring government to intervene. In fact, it looks as if the employers might have wanted government to intervene. So there's a lot of intransigence, and it's not on the RMT's side. Now, of course, at any single moment, it can be argued workers should take a pay cut, but the industry is not going to be industry that we need if we don't have ticket offices, if we have shortages of staff because people simply can't afford to live. So this is a really important moment if the railway is going to be part of our future, particularly part of our low-carbon future into the decades ahead. A
lot of what the public will take from this is that rail workers are wanting high pay rises. And are the demands unreasonable, given where we are?
Well, there's been a lot of misinformation, firstly, about railway workers' pay, and people have been banding around figures of 50 and 40,000. The average is much closer to the median income of workers across the UK. And, you know, who at the moment can afford to take a 7 or an 8% effective pay cut? And that's before we look at energy prices and other things that are going to hit us in the autumn. They simply can't afford not to take action in defence of their pay and their terms and conditions.
John, can't afford not to make these claims?
Well, I mean, I think everybody has sympathy with everybody who's facing a real cut in their cost of living, which everybody does, and I think that the problem is that taking strike action and forcing higher pay settlements is likely to be counterproductive in the medium to long term. I mean, I have every sympathy with the rail workers, as I have with any worker who's facing a real terms cut in their standard of living. But withdrawing the labour's not going to be the long-term answer to it.
More broadly, John, and we're looking at public sector, potentially a lot of public sector strikes over this summer, private sector as well, but looking specifically at the public sector, should governments, plural, be getting more involved in these negotiations?
No, I don't think so. But I think what government should be doing is looking at how they can A, stimulate growth in the economy, and B, cut taxes, put money into people's pockets by reducing the tax burden that they face, and therefore also reduce the pressure on wage demands. But stimulating the economy is the long-term way out of the inflationary spiral, which is the one thing that we should all agree we're trying to avoid.
But in the short term, John, given that the public pay negotiations that are going on, would it help if the UK government in some cases, the Scottish government in other cases, got involved now?
No, I think it's a matter between the unions and the employers. That they're the ones that are going to have to bear the brunt of the impact of any pay settlements, similar to local government workers, where councils will have to negotiate with the public sector unions and have to work out the consequences of any pay deals that they come to. So if the government intervened and started to impose or tried to impose pay settlements, they would only make matters much more complicated and take away control from the people who've got to implement the results of those agreements.
Dave, should governments be involved?
Well, certainly governments should be involved where they are either the direct or in many cases the de facto employer. They are in a sense in charge of public sector pay settlements across the UK and in Scotland. That's the case for Holyrood too. So they're much closer than John is suggesting to this situation. And John talked about the need to boost the economy. There is probably no better way at the moment to boost our economy, which needs some spending power in it, than to put that into the pockets of hard-working public service workers, particularly the lower paid ones, particularly the ones that use that money in their own communities. I simply cannot think of a better way to boost the economy just now than through workers' pay.
Well, who pays for that?
I mean, government paid for it, and therefore government either needs to borrow more in the short term so that it can increase the size of the economy, which of course in turn makes it easier to service that debt. In the same way as many private sector employers are offering far more than the public sector are being offered just now, because they understand that it's probably better that their shareholders take a hit in the long run than they get a workforce which either is insufficient in size or skills.
Does that not just cause spiralling inflation, which is the fear?
Well, no, because we have a very strange economic situation here where that inflation is not being driven by wage demands or by former wage demands. It's being driven by extraneous factors such as Brexit and other things. But at the same time, we have an economy which is on the cusp of going into recession. Now, if we reduce the spending power of workers, then we make that recession more likely. And the last thing you want is high unemployment at the same time as you have a recession.
Very briefly then, and finally from you both. John, are you pessimistic or optimistic about the summer ahead?
Fairly pessimistic. I think the problem, Dave's actually alighted on it but come up with the wrong answer, that spiralling public expenditure, either by borrowing or otherwise, ultimately results in higher taxes. The government doesn't have its own money, it's got our money. And higher taxes to pay for higher public spending will only rebound on those people who are looking for improvements to their standard of living.
OK, and pessimistic or optimistic?
I'm pessimistic in terms of the amount of industrial action we might see, because we're not seeing government taking the action that it needs to reasonably meet the demands of workers. I'm optimistic in the sense that I think that action will have an effect and government will begin to recognise that it needs to do something in this area, as it needs to do more generally about the cost of living crisis.
Dave, John, thank you both for joining us in Scotland tonight.